the story, Mr. Judd.
Morning.
You represent Ralph Fanning, Mr. Judd?
Captain Fanning, what's his problem this time?
Well, it's on the radio. Have you heard of Mr. Judd?
Gentlemen, I haven't been listening to anything but weather reports. I'm here on behalf of a simple fisherman named Clinton Judd.
Oh, come on.
It's true. It's true. It's as true as the blue of the Gulf Stream. I came here to go fishing with Captain Fanning.
On what? His boat sunk.
Dorothy? I got your message at the marina. What's this all about?
It's Fanning. He took a party out on a cruise. 4 people. The Chambers family.
Chambers still in Dyke Corporation.
This morning, a plane spotted him in the water. Why, he didn't even have a life jacket on. Coast Guard picked him up, and they're bringing him in now.
It's John Emery, Assistant U.S. Attorney from Houston. Dorothy, how did all this happen?
I don't know. That's just it. Nobody knows.
Nosotros sí sabemos, ¿verdad? The same thing that happened to those people happened to our people 3 months ago. Mr. Judd, Captain Fanning, he murdered them. He murdered them.
Judd, for the defense.
Thank you, fellas.
All right, I'm all right. I'm all right.
Let's see, you're hurt.
No, it's just a bump in the head. You can take my word, it's nothing.
What about my party, Lieutenant? Any word? Got an air sea search going all over the Gulf. The only word is, all 4 people still missing.
That's 5. My mate's a person, too. Well, that doesn't make any sense. A boat disappearing in fair weather and calm seas. How could it?
That's what we'd like to ask you.
Asesino! Gusta matar, asesino!
People have disappeared from your boat before, Captain.
Mr. Emery, if you have in mind those 2 political refugees from Cuba,
I have.
I recall certain loose charges against Captain Fanning, but no facts developed and the charges were dropped.
That's because you're a very able lawyer, Mr. Judd.
And I won't hesitate to defend Captain Fanning all over again. Did anything happen you don't want to talk about?
I don't know what happened. I went up on the deck, and the next thing I know, I'm swimming in the dark.
That's the best time to kill, at night!
Listen, Fuentes. You got something to say? Come on down here and say it.
What shall I say to you, Captain? That money? How much money are you going to make in the insurance of your boat?
Mr. Morton, one of them's been picked up. Which one? The name's Rita Chambers. Rita, that's their kid. Well, if it has to be only one, I'm glad it's a kid.
Hello, Rita. My name's Clinton Judd. I'm a friend of Captain Fanning's. He was mighty worried about you, Rita. Would you like to tell me what happened out there? Suppose we start with a life raft. Now, what was a pretty girl like you doing floating around in a life raft, huh?
I can't do it.
You can't tell me what happened?
Can't make the knot.
Oh. Well, you've made some kind of knot.
I'm trying to make a sheet bend.
A sheet bend? Well, now, wouldn't it be easier if you used 2 hands?
What are you doing here?
Oh, how do you do, ma'am? I'm Clinton Judd. I'm Captain Fanning's attorney.
Well, I'm Rita's aunt. And I won't have you tormenting the child. She's been through quite enough.
I'm not about to harm her. I understand she's doing fine.
She was never doing fine, even before this happened. Now, will you please leave?
Would you mind telling me why the bandage?
She was shot.
Ben Caldwell. Oh, hi, Clint.
Ben, I want you to get out here right away.
Oh, fine. Should I bring any tackle?
Not unless you expect to go fishing in a courtroom water cooler. Ralph Fanning is about to be arrested.
Only one of those persons has been found alive. Mr. Commissioner, this child sustained a wound identifiable by physicians as a gunshot wound. The defendant, Captain Ralph Fanning, is known to have had aboard his boat a rifle for the purpose of shooting sharks. Furthermore, the government can show that the defendant Fanning stood to profit financially from this tragedy, of which he is the only survivor. We have reason to believe that evidence will come to light proving that the gravest of crimes has been committed here. But pending that evidence, we are moving that the defendant be held over for trial on the charge of assault with a deadly weapon.
Mr. Commissioner, there were 4 other adults on board capable of pulling a rifle trigger. There was Mrs. Chambers. There was Mr. Chambers. There was his business associate, Douglas Parker, a guest on the cruise. There was Samuel Aldrin, the mate. I submit that a single bullet wound, which might have been inflicted by any one of 5 people, is not sufficient basis for holding Captain Fanning. And I move for dismissal.
May I point out, Mr. Commissioner, that Mr. Judd's tactic in this case is remarkably similar to the tactics he used 3 months ago on behalf of the same defendant.
Mr. Emery, I am not unsympathetic to your point, but I don't see how I can allow it as a legal argument. I am therefore going...
Excuse me. Can I interrupt for a moment, please?
Where is Tarpon Reef?
Within a possible radius of the position where Captain Fanning was picked up.
Mr. Commissioner, they've located a sunken boat that could be the Neptune's child.
It's not my boat.
May we have a continuance long enough to send down divers to find out?
We certainly may, Mr. Emery. This hearing is set over.
Well, as the saying goes, if you can't fish, you better cut bait. Ben, I'm going back to Houston, practice a little lucrative law. You stay here with Captain Fanning.
Okay.
If he's right, it's not his boat, you can get the case dismissed.
And if he's wrong?
If I'm wrong, I deserve to have you as my lawyer. Working birds. Means a school of bluefish underneath.
You seem more interested in the birds than anything else right now.
Birds are the only ones out here minding their own business.
For the sake of argument, well, what makes you so sure that's not the Neptune's child down there?
No reason in the world why my boat would sink.
A boat can develop a leak.
Are you saying I'd take a party out to sea in a hull that wasn't sound?
I don't know. From what I hear, you do nothing more and nothing less than exactly what you feel like doing.
That's a bad way for a man to make a living. My boats don't sink in fair weather.
Okay, the Neptune's child was perfect.
I didn't say she was perfect. I said she was sound. Except for the holes I had to keep on plugging up when Dorothy shot into her.
Dorothy did what?
She grabbed my rifle every once in a while and she blazed away at the boat.
Why?
She convinced herself if I didn't have a boat, I'd get myself a wife. But I don't want a wife. Object coming up. Diver coming up.
Bodies in the cabin.
How many?
4. A woman, 3 men. Every one of them shot through the head.
I was below in the cabin. I came up on deck. When I got to the head of the companionway, I was struck a blow in the head.
And I'd still like to know what kind of blow.
And I still don't know what kind of a blow. All I know is that the head of the aft companionway is 42 inches from the transom. 1 or 2 lurching steps from there, and you're overboard. That's exactly what happened to me. That's all I remember.
Now, why did you go up on deck?
I don't know. Maybe it was to get them another
Another what?
Another bottle of booze. They had it pretty good every night. No, wait a minute. That's not the reason I went below. The kid. The kid called me.
Rita? Called you for what?
Yeah, I was showing her nuts. You know, sailor's nuts. She hung around me a lot.
You like the kid?
What do you mean? She's a 10-year-old kid. I don't even like Dorothy. Just felt sorry for the miserable, oddball little kid, that's all.
The aunt said something like that. Why was she miserable?
Why don't you ask her?
We can't. The aunt won't let us near her. Ben's been trying, but she treats him like a cattle rustler.
Yeah, how do you expect a kid to be with parents fighting all the time?
What were they fighting about?
I didn't pay any attention.
Then how do you know they were fighting?
Because you can tell in the morning.
Okay. You were below with Rita, teaching her how to make sailor's knots. Then you went up on deck. Why?
I don't know. Maybe there was no special reason. I just... Wait a minute. The kid. Kid went up to show them a new knot that I just taught her. Now I remember, I heard shots.
Gunshots? Up on deck?
Yes, I thought it was Parker using my rifle to shoot sharks. He was always shooting sharks.
Shooting in the dark?
That's it. That's what was wrong. That's why I went up. And the last thing I remember hearing before I went out cold was a shot. That means that I was knocked out by a bullet.
What about the Fuentes brothers, Ralph?
You don't believe I was shot?
Oh, there were gunshots on your boat, all right. It's a little convenient that one of them just grazed you, that you couldn't remember it until after your wound healed. The Fuentes brothers, Ralph.
What about them?
They paid you to bring 2 refugees from Cuba, and you turned up without them.
I swear to you that I never killed anybody.
Think it over.
I've thought it over.
And?
You can go take a flying jump in the Gulf of Mexico.
That's what he said to you?
And that terminated the interview. Eloise, if we get those bills out, maybe we can pay your salary.
Fine.
Okay, then that takes us off the case of Captain Fanning, right? I mean, we don't even take that from clients who can't afford us.
Ben, let me ask you something. Haven't you ever been tempted to tell me off in just about the same way Ralph Fanning did?
No comment.
That's the difference between you and Ralph Fanning. He doesn't have your silver tongue.
He's got a tongue like a cross-cut saw. The man can't say so much as please or thank you.
Yeah, that's only the beginning. He just won't express any of the things people like to hear. The warmer the feeling, the harder the words seem to freeze up in his throat. It's almost as though the passageway after all these years had been so choked up that nothing can get through but something rugged. Result, one loner, solitary as a cat.
Or maybe he just doesn't give a rap for anybody else.
Don't you believe it. For instance, he says he doesn't even like Dorothy. It's ridiculous. What he means is he loves Dorothy. I'll tell you somebody else he's fond of. Rita Chambers. He calls her an oddball little kid, but I know what he's trying to say.
And what was he trying to say when he told you where to go?
He was asking me to trust him. He was reminding me of all the times I sailed with him.
And do you trust him?
We've been through some pretty rough water.
So now you are trying to bring him back home safe and sound, is that it?
With your help, of course. I was thinking, if he won't talk about the Fuentes brothers, maybe the Fuentes brothers will talk about him. See if you can locate them.
See if you can locate them yourself. Oh, just studying to be the rugged type like Captain Fanning. From now on, whatever I say, you'll understand I mean the opposite.
Hay mucho Scotch whiskey I keep, and we're big tippers.
And what else do you want, Mr. Judd?
The Fuentes brothers.
Something tells me that it would have been safer to jump in the Gulf of Mexico.
What makes you think that Rafael and Julio are here, senor?
Well, they're not in Port Margaret anymore, or Galveston. Mr. Gutierrez and Captain Fanning's trial comes up Monday morning in the Houston federal court. And you're their brother-in-law.
Now, Mr. Gutierrez, we're not going to hurt those boys. Tell them that. Tell Rafael not to be afraid of us.
No one is afraid, Mr. Judd.
Good. Sit down. Have a drink.
I don't drink with you.
What do you want, Mr. Judd?
We want to know why you call Captain Fanning a murderer.
Because we hired this captain to take 2 friends out of Cuba and bring them here. And instead, he threw them in the water.
And for this, we swear he will pay, Mr. Judd.
You realize what you're saying in front of witnesses?
Oh, we don't have to do it with knives, Mr. Judd. We will do it with law in the court.
How do you know Captain Fanning threw your friends overboard?
Now, what am I going to do with this? Right. Eloise, no more calls.
Let him tell you himself what he threw overboard. Let him handle it alone the way he does everything else.
Now, look, Dorothy, if Ralph hadn't been such a loner all his life, he might not be on trial for murder. The prosecution wouldn't be able to sell the idea that he's capable of it. He wouldn't be able to build images for the jury. 2 images. One of the reckless loner who smuggles human beings, the other of the nice, clean-cut American family on a happy holiday. Images, Dorothy. We're a nation of images. Now, Ralph just could hang for his. Now, what did he throw overboard?
Guns. Fanning said there was no percentage in running empty one way, so he set it up to take guns into Cuba and refugees out. 2 cargoes, 2 profits. Only the refugees never showed up. Before he could land the guns, a patrol boat came after his boat and he had to dump them.
Captain's a gun runner, too. Well, that should help his image a lot.
What about the other image? The nice, clean family. How nice was that Mrs. Chambers?
What was wrong with her?
Oh, nothing. Nothing if it's all right for a married woman to show up at the dock ahead of her husband and then have a hot little wrestling match with the captain, right out on deck.
Were you jealous?
Yes, I was.
And of whom were you jealous the times you shot holes in Ralph's boat?
Mr. Judd, nobody's going to think that I had anything to do with what happened on that schooner.
Dorothy, no one really knows what happened. Except a child. And she won't say.
Rita can't tell you anything.
I was hoping by this time that Rita might have told you something.
The doctor says she's blocked it. Wiped it out of her mind because it's too terrible to remember.
Doctor think this has any connection with the fact that her parents weren't getting along?
Who told you that?
It's true, isn't it?
No. Mr. Caldwell, I am all the child has now, and I've got to protect her. Now, won't you please leave us alone? Rita doesn't even know her parents are dead.
It must be very difficult for you when she asks about them.
It's very easy. She doesn't ask.
Of Port Margaret, Captain William Slocum.
May it please the court.
Interruptions already, Mr. Judd.
Mr. Emery, if it is your intention to establish that the deceased person set sail on July 14th on board the defendant's boat...
It is?
I was just going to say, we'll concede that to you.
Well, thank you very much. May I call the rest of my witnesses, or will you concede their testimony, too?
I told him we'd renew his commercial charter certificate this time. However, I advised him that he couldn't expect to get by so easily next time.
Well, why not?
Well, new regulations coming into effect require certain equipment changes on commercial passenger-carrying vessels. For example, improved navigational aids.
And what, if anything, did the defendant say about that?
He said he didn't know how he'd ever be able to lay his hands on that kind of money.
Aren't you going to object to that?
I was sorry about
To the fact that our client needed money? Who doesn't? The question is whether he was capable of committing murder to get money.
Yeah, well, maybe the answer is just coming into court now.
The government calls Rafael Fuentes.
He told us these friends of ours never showed up to meet his boat. So he had to come back without them. But from what my brother saw, we know he's lying.
We're going to take your brother's testimony later, Mr. Fuentes, but tell the court what you did.
I got a false passport, and I went back to Cuba myself.
And what, if anything, did you learn there?
I learned from our people there that these friends of ours did show up to meet Mr. Fanning's boat.
It's a barefaced lie.
Mr. Emery, I must observe I don't see that this line of testimony has any relevance to the case before us.
Your Honor, Mr. Judd is not objecting. Defense may cross-examine.
No questions. At this time, Your Honor, we reserve the right to cross-examine later.
Why did I go out in the boat that night? I went out to make sure these friends of ours were all right, you know? We hired this Captain Fanning, but we didn't exactly trust him.
Why didn't you trust him?
With him, it is all the money. A man like that, you have to hire him for a dangerous job. But trust him? Never!
When you went looking for the defendant's boat that night to see if your friends were all right, did you catch sight of it?
I see a Cuban gunboat come up and chase Fanning's boat. And I see Captain Fanning take my friends and throw them overboard.
Mr. Emery, I must observe I don't see the relevancy of this testimony either.
Your Honor, I'm showing that since the defendant was capable of murder by drowning of 2 people, he was capable of moving up to the murder by shooting of 4. Mr. Judd, I suppose you don't care to cross-examine this witness either?
Mr. Emery, you're wrong. I do. Mr. Fuentes, would it be fair to say that your boat was not very close to Captain Fanning's boat?
Yes.
Well, then couldn't you have mistaken some other objects being thrown overboard for the forms of your friends?
No.
Well, now, what I mean is, haven't you seen other objects in the same general shape and size as a human being?
I don't know.
Well, tell me this. When Mr. Emery was going over your testimony with you, didn't he tell you that the only good answers to make in a cross-examination were yes, no, and I don't know? Is a chest of approximately 5 feet in length and 2.5 feet in breadth of the same general shape and size as a human being?
Yes.
But such a chest thrown into the sea would remain in sight. That is, it wouldn't sink, would it?
No.
Unless it were weighted down with heavy contents, Mr. Fuentes. Like guns, Mr. Fuentes. Was Captain Fanning running guns to Cuba?
I don't know.
Which just about sums up your testimony, doesn't it, Mr. Fuentes? You don't know. You may step down.
I tell you that
That's all, Mr. Fuentes. You may step down.
Pretty sharp, you, Mr. Judd.
Yeah, he just happens to think the guilty are as much entitled to be defended as the innocent.
Mr. Penner, will you please state your occupation?
Marine insurance.
Did you ever sell an insurance policy to the defendant?
Yes. That is, I didn't have to do too much selling. He came to me, to my home, banged in my door at 8 o'clock in the morning.
On the morning of what day?
July 14th.
Please describe what happened.
He said he had just picked up a charter, and he wanted a $40,000 insurance policy before he sailed. Well, I told him I couldn't allow $40,000 without inspection. So he said he'd take what I could give him. He didn't want to wait. So I wrote him a binder for $28,000, and he paid the premium then and there.
Mr. Penner, is it your testimony that the defendant had no insurance on his boat, but that he came to you on the morning of July 14th, on the very brink of this fatal cruise, and insisted on taking out an insurance policy?
That is correct.
May it please the court, the prosecution rests.
Mr. Judd, will you begin the defense portion?
Not yet, Your Honor. At this time, I would like to exercise my privilege to cross-examine one of the Fuentes brothers.
Which one?
The hot-headed one. What's his name? Oh, yes, Rafael. Mr. Fuentes, did you or did you not, on the morning of July 18th, rent a high-powered open boat? I have here a copy of a receipt from one Joe Evalones.
All right, I rent a boat.
Where'd you go with it?
South. Maybe a little east.
Southeast? In the direction of Tarpon Reef? For what purpose?
To fish.
For what fish?
Tarpon.
Are you a sportsman, Mr. Fuentes? Can you afford to rent a twin-engine boat just for sport fishing?
No.
Tarpon is not a food fish. It has no commercial value. Who was with you on that boat? I'm not asking for their names. Just tell the court if you were alone.
I was not alone.
Mr. Fuentes, I suggest that you went looking for the Neptune's child.
No.
You had an idea where she was cruising. You gleaned it from the talk at the pier, from the men coming in on the commercial boats.
That is not the truth.
And you knew that Captain Fanning carried a rifle.
That I knew, yes.
Did you and your friends board the schooner that night?
No.
Did you shoot Captain Fanning with his own rifle? And then after he fell into the sea, did you shoot everyone else on board and then sink the Neptune's child? Perhaps by opening the sea cocks to cover up your crime?
No, no, no!
Oh, I see. You're not a violent man, is that it?
That is it!
But isn't it true that you said in front of witnesses that for what Captain Fanning did to your friends, you would make him pay like this?
I said, with the law. We would make him pay with the law.
And do you always act within the law? Even when you slipped in and out of Cuba on a forged passport? When you risked your life to get information about your friends?
This is not question of law.
But isn't it true that you didn't go there for information, but that you went there really to earn a reward?
How?
By denouncing your friends to the government before they could escape.
That was not a cross-examination. That was sheer provocation of a witness.
And I apologize, Mr. Emery, to you and to the court. But my motive, Your Honor, in provoking the witness was to prove that he is capable of violent emotions and violent action. The prosecution has attempted to establish that only Captain Fanning could have committed the crime for which he is charged. The defense is now citing Mr. Fuentes as another possibility. It is not necessary for the defense to prove that Mr. Fuentes and his companions killed those persons on board Neptune's child. It is only necessary to cite it as a possibility. There are, accordingly, two possibilities. And it becomes automatically impossible to prove Captain Fanning guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Your Honor, I move for dismissal on grounds that the prosecution has failed to establish its case.
Mr. Emery, I will have to take the defense motion under advisement.
Your Honor, before you do, and although the prosecution has rested, may I request the court's permission to call one additional witness? I was most reluctant to call him, but
this is a tactic. I suspect that Mr. Emery intended to call this witness all along.
Mr. Judd, for you to suspect tactics in another lawyer is a little bit like the pot and kettle, isn't it? Who's your witness, Mr. Emery?
The child, Rita Chambers. Rita, I promised your aunt that I wouldn't ask you to talk about anything that you didn't want to talk about. Do you understand, Rita?
Yes.
Do you want to tell us about what happened on the boat that night?
Yes. It was him.
Captain Fanning?
Yes.
And what, if anything, did he do?
He killed them. Captain Fanning. He killed them all.
Now, Rita, can you begin at the beginning and tell us everything that happened?
Well, I went down to the galley, but I couldn't find anything to eat that I liked. So I came back up, and the captain had the gun.
And what, if anything, did he do?
He said, "This is it."
The captain said, "This is it"?
And he shot Mommy, and she fell down. Then he shot Mr. Parker, and Mr. Parker fell down. Then he shot Daddy, and I ran away. That's when I felt a sting in my arm.
Rita, can you tell us how you got into the life raft?
No, not exactly. I know Sam was yelling at me. Sam the mate. He was yelling, "Jump." So I climbed down the ladder and I jumped. This is a square knot.
So that is a square knot.
It never happened.
Are you sure that it's not a granny knot? And are you sure that the captain shot all those people, Rita? Will the court please instruct the defendant to rise? Rita, is that the man? Will the court please instruct that her answer be recorded as yes? That is the man. That is the man.
The answer will be recorded as yes.
Will Your Honor grant a brief recess?
Of course, the child isn't the world's most reliable witness. She's still in some sort of disturbed state. Even her own psychiatrist would have to testify to that.
No question about it.
If we could develop some sort of a case against the Fuentes group, we might get by.
All right. What can we believe about the Fuentes group? That their friends are missing? Certainly. But how? Why? You know, I guess that those refugees were caught when they went out to meet Fanning's boat. They were clapped in prison somewhere, the Isle of Pines maybe, and not a word about this given out by the government. So we find the Fuentes group blaming Fanning and renting a boat on the morning of July 18th to catch up with him and pay him back. But, Ben, do you believe they would murder 4 other people in the process? I don't.
You yourself established a possibility.
Possibility is one thing, Ben. Hanging a murder charge on innocent men is another. Just how far are we supposed to go to defend a client?
What choice do we have? What other line of defense can we go with?
We can go with the truth. Dorothy, come in here. Dorothy, I'm going to put you on the witness stand.
To say what?
To say what you saw between Mrs. Chambers and Fanning after she came on board the Neptune's Child.
That she swarmed all over Fanning? Mr. Judd, I'm not going to say any such thing.
Do you want Ralph convicted? Now, level with me, Dorothy. Is there some reason in that female mind of yours why you want a guilty verdict?
Yes, I'm sure it was Mrs. Chambers. And I'm sure it was Fanning she kissed. The only thing I'm not so sure of is what this has to do with...
At the time you thought you saw this embrace between Mrs. Chambers and Ralph Fanning, where were you?
In my office at the marina.
And was this very close to the deck of the Neptune's Child, or was it some distance away?
I could see them very clearly through the window.
Can you describe what Captain Fanning was wearing when he came up from the cabin?
Yes, a baseball cap with a long visor and a blue fleece-lined jacket that I gave him for his birthday.
I now show you a copy of the police custodian's report listing the items found with the deceased persons when their bodies were recovered. Would you please read aloud the section pertaining to Douglas Parker?
1 pair of white canvas shoes, 1 pair of white socks, 1 denim trousers, 1 long visored cap, 1 blue jacket, fleece-lined.
Who was the first of the guests to arrive on board the Neptune's Child?
It was Parker.
To your knowledge, did Captain Fanning's customers ever need to borrow items of his clothing?
Yes, of course they did.
Then is it possible that the embrace you saw dimly and at a distance was not between Mrs. Chambers and Captain Fanning, but between Mrs. Chambers and Douglas Parker? Your Honor, the defense at this time calls Mrs. Helen Willoughby a hostile witness. I will repeat my question. Did you have knowledge of an affair between your sister and Douglas Parker?
And I'll repeat my answer. There was no affair.
Mrs. Willoughby, I remind you that you're under oath. Will you tell the court why Mr. Parker was invited along on that cruise?
He was a business associate of Sherman's.
But wasn't this a family outing?
Sherman invited him anyway.
Are you sure it was Mr. Chambers who invited Parker along? Or was it Mrs. Chambers?
It couldn't have been.
Why not?
Because she wasn't out of her mind.
Then there was this romance.
I begged her to break it off. I told her Sherman couldn't take much more. It was making him sick.
By sick, you mean mentally?
I didn't say that.
What would you say of a man who deliberately invites on a family outing the friend with whom we know his wife is having...
I don't know!
What would you say of a man who deliberately shoots 3 people in the head, opens the seacocks of the vessel, then places the rifle butt on the deck, positioning his own head above the muzzle at such an angle...
Objection!
At such an angle that no medical examiner in the world, even with grounds to suspect such a thing...
Objection!
...tell for certain that one of the 4 fatal wounds was not self-inflicted?
Objection, Your Honor. This is pure, absolute conjecture.
No, Your Honor. It is not conjecture. It is regrettable fact. I regret it because of the blemish on the memory of a family believed to be among the finest in American society. But I am defending a man's life. And although in the minds of many people he may never have fitted properly into American society, he is entitled to have the truth established. And I will establish it, Your Honor, with the next witness. A child, Your Honor, who cannot bear to face this painful truth, who has blocked it out of her mind and replaced it with a fantasy.
No, you won't. You won't do that to the kid.
Will Your Honor grant one more brief recess?
And I'm telling you, she can't take it, Clint. Poor miserable oddball little kid's halfway over the edge right now on account of what she's been through. I don't want to see her push the rest of the way.
I'd try not to push very hard.
Yes, you would. You'd tear her apart like you did the others.
Hey, Mr. Judd is trying to save your neck.
All right, she's done enough. I'll take my chances with the case the way it is right now.
Oh, and where did you study law? How do you know what your chances are worth?
I know what I'm worth. I've risked my neck a lot of times, and for what? To do nothing more or less than exactly what I wanted to. You remember that? But when a man lives that way, he's got to pay the price sooner or later. And if I have to, I'll pay it. But my way, the way I've always done it, by myself. And I don't want a little kid paying it for me.
Clint? I'd try it his way. I'd take a chance.
We could lose.
All right, then, we'll lose. What is it that you hate to lose so much, this case? Or your reputation?
What I hate to lose is the principle that a lawyer must defend his client with the last grain of his abilities. And I want you in that courtroom with your mouth shut. And the same goes for you. For once in your life, you'll do what somebody else wants if I have to have you bound and gagged.
For the cross-examination of this child, this court will not permit the kind of pressure normally used by counsel against witnesses. Mr. Judd, if that's perfectly clear, you may proceed.
Now, to go over it all again, Rita. It was the captain who was facing your mother. And where was your daddy?
In the cabin.
And the captain said to your mother, "This is it." I'm wondering about that remark, "This is it." I'm wondering if you ever heard it before. You're not saying no, are you? That means you're not saying no, so you must be saying yes. We could make it a game. Now, suppose I try to guess where you heard it, and you shake your head if I'm wrong, and nod your head up and down if I'm right. In the car? School? Park? Circus? In your house? Kitchen? Dining room? From behind a certain door at night? Now, I wonder who could have said that to your mother. We don't have to give a name. We can just say somebody. Why don't we just say, well, names can be such a nuisance. We'll just say Mr. Somebody. Well, where'd you learn to make those knots, Rita? Captain Fanning showed you. What's that?
Don't you know?
Well, suppose you tell me.
It's a sheep bend. Almost anybody can do that.
Oh.
That's a bowline.
Oh. That one seems harder.
I can too make it.
What is it?
It's a bowline on a bite.
Did Captain Fanning show you that? Was it the first one he showed you? The last? Well, you know, Rita, when you learn something from somebody, you have to try it for yourself right away so you don't forget it. So I guess you didn't make the bowling on a bite right away.
I couldn't. I was going to, but when I got up on deck, they were arguing.
By they, you mean who?
My mother.
Your mother and who?
No!
All right. Names can be such a bother. We won't name him. Can we just say your mother was arguing with somebody? Was it Mr. somebody? And he said, "This is it," and he fired the gun?
Yes. My daddy, he loved me. He didn't mean to shoot me. He didn't. I can't do it.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I wish to express my thanks to you for your time and patience. And I direct you to find the defendant not guilty.
Well, he'll be off and running now. Back to sea.
Oh, I wouldn't be too sure about that, Dorothy. Why don't you try offering him a job at your marina? Just one more time.
Are you kidding? He won't take it. He's just gonna buy himself another boat.
With what?
With the $28,000 insurance money he'll have.
Will he? Not once he gets my bill.